right, welcome back. We took a brief pause of Q&A with Mitch and Jay for Mitch to get back to the blizzard of Crested Butte, Colorado, where it's still snowy.
Yep.
So, Mitch, we were talking about timing of racing and how many races you should run, recovery time in between events, just avoiding that dangerous area of potential injury. And one of the topics that I've seen a lot, and I think this is primarily just inexperience. I don't think that these coaches understand how difficult it is to race every weekend, or in this case with some middle school and high school athletes, they're racing like Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
Yeah.
And I just feel like the long-term development of the athlete is really hindered a ton when you're not learning how to train and how to rest and how to really prepare for an event. And then also it's trouble when you have 4 events in one day.
Yeah.
And they're all 800 meters and over. So what's your experience with that? Like, what are your thoughts talking about those young athletes?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think at a high school level, my experience was that a lot of high school coaches have the good intention of giving their kids the most that they can give them out of the season because it's a short season, right? But I think what they struggle with is like I think it's hard for a grown adult that maybe hasn't competed in a long time to remember what it felt like to, on a Saturday, do 5 events. Like in high school, I used to do 5 events. I did 2 relays, 3 races, and it's an entire day of absolute full speed in the sun, everything, right? And then if we've got to meet the next Saturday, what you're talking about here is you're talking about the most sort of central nervous stress you could possibly put on a human athlete, right? And then they've got Sunday to rest. And then Monday, we just going back, we hitting it again. And you're expected to go back the next Saturday and
do it again
and PR again, right? You have to PR again. So it's interesting because like, I think it's out of good intention, but I think many coaches have lost the feeling of what it's like to like, unless you're really pushing yourself or competing, you don't realize like how much stress race pace puts on your body, even if you're in really good shape, right? And I think over the years, you kind of like forget that. And you think, oh, they're kids, they can handle it. And that's probably true. They can handle it. But when we're looking at like high school coaches and high school athletes, I think the goal of a high school coach should be like, what can I do this season to make this athlete of whatever level in terms of skill level through high school or middle school believe in themselves and that they can accomplish more with dedication? And how do they learn how to manage their body through not just a season but through life? And you know, in every other endeavor in high school, it's all about, I want to show you what you're capable of. But when we get to athletics, it's just push. And there's no like delicacy in, there's so much delicacy when it comes to like, how do I build someone mentally? But then in high school, the physical aspect, they're just looked as like these tiny human beings that don't receive stress the same way we do. And obviously it's like, it's different at that age, but it still should be dealt with this like careful consideration of stresses, lifestyle, timing, school, you know, other things like schoolwork, travel, all these things. So that's kind of my experience at the high school level. And, you know, like when I coached high school for 4 years in Crested Butte, and what I tried to guide other coaches and the athletes is like, if you put in a hard day on Saturday, right? Sunday's rest day, Monday's easy day, because you're not back from it yet. You just have one rest day after 5 events of hyper intense activity, right? Tuesday, we can push it, but not even in regards to speed. I wouldn't push it. I'd push in regards to like, okay, we're doing some tempo work, or we're doing intervals, but nowhere close to race pace of anything, right? And then Wednesday we get to like work. So Tuesday we get to build up. Wednesday we get to work. Thursday you can't kill it on Thursday. You got to meet on Saturday. So you really get 2 days of work in that week to go, but that to perform your best coming off a Saturday to Saturday meet. What I did as a coach is I said, listen, we're going to do like 5 meets this entire year. But what you're going to do is you're going to have 2 weeks to come down from the previous meet, build up continuously with obviously tiny microcycles in that for 2 weeks or maybe even 3 weeks, taper, and then PR. And that's what I found I could get the best out of the athletes, was doing less meets, but we could progress drastically between each meet, and the kids were psyched on it and not just like drained because they've done it for 10 weeks in a row, you know?
I think part of the thought process mistake when you race every weekend is that it's going to build character to see how much you can handle.
Yeah.
Like that just tears you down.
Yeah.
And it's really, really difficult to deal with. And it actually means that you have to overcome like these really bad races. Like, you know, if you run 5 events or 4 events or 3 events, and you do it every weekend, and your last event is the 2 mile at 2:00 in the afternoon, and it's 98 degrees, I don't know that builds character, man.
Yeah.
I think that builds a distaste for the 2 mile.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it builds this distancing from the event. When if you run a 2 mile or 5K or a longer race, and it's the right time of year and you're ready for it, and even if it's hot, if you're ready and you're prepared, and the coach has accurately understood how much your body can handle, you can run incredibly well.
Yeah.
And have a great experience. And I think in my mind, part of my job as a coach with any athlete is to give them as positive of experiences as they can with their racing.
Absolutely.
And so if you know it's going to be a terrible experience, let's delay it and let's look for a good one. Yeah. Now, I think the one caveat there is like, if you're trying to win a state championship as a team and you're trying to score points and win it or get 4th or something like that, then that's fine. But even that is not, you shouldn't do that every weekend.
And possibly not at the sacrifice of the psyche of a young human, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, go ahead.
They may be able to physiologically handle it and recover in a week, but the emotional side may be really, really bad. I mean, I've been with athletes before that are like 14, 13 years old, and when they run bad, and it is hard. I've been there. I mean, I used to take me 2 weeks to get over a bad race.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the old, the strategy of let's see how much you can take, to me, is not necessarily appropriate in the early teen ages, right? That's appropriate when you get high teens and you've got this, like, you've built a mentality and you know where you want to go, at least for temporary, short term, right? In your 20s, you got to just get it together and push. In your 30s, when you're like you're a grown human and you're like, I know what I want. Let's go. It's going to be challenging, right? You're talking about a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, you know what I mean? They can break. They'll break. You won't even see them break, right? Like you won't even be halfway there and some of them will break. And that break is not necessarily a huge positive like it is maybe in your 30s or your late 20s at 12 years old. You know what I mean? That could like really, I'm not talking about being soft with kids because I don't believe we should be soft with kids, but it's a delicate balance. I don't believe like, hey, we're going to push, do as much as we can do because it's a short season. To me, as much as we can do is saying, how far can we get you with good planning? And how can you realize, which is the whole point of high school, how can you realize that through training, through meticulously planning, through taking care of yourself, I can make you realize that you can do so much more than you think you could do. Because that, for me as a high school coach, when I was a high school coach or a coach of any athlete, that to me is my goal, even out of athletics, is how can I make you realize you can do so much more than you think you can do? Because most people are only realizing that when they're like 30, 40, when they're like, oh, I can do so much more, right? So like, yeah, I think, you know, the other hard thing about high school is like, you've got this set of, let's say you have 40 athletes, you've got these 40 sets of like no one's on the same page in high school, right? Someone's just broken up with their girlfriend and someone's just like, they just did horribly on a test that they needed to do well to like get some sort of college thing offer, and someone's parents are going through a divorce, you know what I mean? The only way for me, and this is just my opinion, the only way for me to responsibly handle that is with care, right? And not like, no, your parents' divorce doesn't matter. You need to run this 2-mile, bro. I know you've done it 10 weeks in a row and it's been hard and horrible, but let's get it.
We got to do it. We got to do it for the points, for the team.
Yeah, for the team, bro, for the team.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's interesting. I just don't know that how much can you do, how often mindset is appropriate for like low, low
here's where I think you can test it safely though, is I think you can test it 6 days out, 5 days out from another hard effort.
Yeah.
When you don't have another one planned for the next 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And you can do it in practice, and you can do it with so many different ways. You can test it with volume. Mm-hmm. You can test it with speed. You can manipulate the rest up or down to make the workout more difficult. Yep. And you can give them a huge challenge. And then the safety in that is when you see it's over the limit, you can pull the plug on the workout.
Yeah.
Whereas in a race, when the second lap of the 2-mile is bad, it's really hard to pull an athlete off the track. I mean, that's demoralizing then too.
Yeah.
So I think that's the safe place the younger you are to kind of test some of those limits without having worry of, man, I can pull the plug as the coach anytime I want.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think giving you, like as a high school coach, especially, but this goes through all athletics, is like, it's got to be a sliding scale, right? There's no just like one way, this is it. And I know that if you're in, like as a high school coach, you've got the parents in the background, you got the kids as a group and then the kids as an individual, and then you got the parents and then you got the expectations and like all this stuff. And I think a lot of the time we get stuck like, this is what we're going to do, or this is the workout. But if the workout's not working for either from what you see from a coaching perspective or the athlete, you got to be able to just like let go. Like to me, it's kind of like, it might be a little bit associated with the ego. You got to be realized like, listen, that's just not working today. Let's cut it. Or let's cut it and edit something. Let's put something at the end of the workout that makes them feel better about the workout. If you've put times on there or distance on there that they just like, right, like it's not fun to them. It's not driving them to be the best. Cut it and put something on the end where they're going to end the day being like, all right, I didn't do this, but I felt really good. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I think the same thing goes for, you can manipulate a season of an athlete, especially in high school, so many ways. They could do, like, if their main event is the mile, throw them in. If they're not feeling like, if they've done high volume and they're just not feeling, you could tell something's down about, because like high school is a lot of times like they wear their feelings on their sleeves. You can read them, right? No matter how well they try and hide it. But like, throw them in a 400 just to like be like, listen, we are still racing today. You're going to feel a different feeling. Or 4x4 where they get to be part of a team, and it's not like this grueling, 4.5 minute like death, sort of like death march, where it's like just put them in something where they can like you have a little bit more fun, use a different energy system, and have them realize like, oh, it's not all about this one thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of ways to manipulate, whether it's on race day or it's on practice day.
Or we could just put them in every event at every race, and then at the end of the year they'll be dead.
Yeah, dude, it'll be great. And then you won't sign up for the next. You'll lose an athlete for the next season.
You'll be done.
And here's the other thing. At the end, guess what happens at the end of a track season? There's two categories. There's the people that go into summer track, which is where the best of the best go.
Yep.
Right? When I was in high school, I was aiming to summer track, and my high school track was B. That was B level.
Yep.
I needed to be, this was like getting ready for summer track, right?
Yep.
If you're tired at the end of high school season, no matter how good you are, summer track is not going to be fun, because guess what? In Texas, it's 110. It's 110 degrees. And you've got to go to Odessa to compete against the best of the best. You're just not going to want to do it. And that's when we start looking at just the progress of an athlete past the season that you are responsible for. Again, kind of like an ego thing. This is, as a coach, right? This is my season. We got to get state. We got to do this many people to state, and this person PR, and you have these little like mini projects that you're like, oh, I know this person's got more in it, right? But what about the rest of their life? What about their summer? Like, if you saved them 15% of energy during that season, kept them psyched out of their mind, that kid might go on to do amazing things in the summer, right?
Yeah, and then if you get into the parents side of it, which the parents are always thinking about college and money and what my kid's going to be able to do, then you're accomplishing all the goals. And here's the other thing. If you have a kid that runs, let's say it's a girl and she runs 5:30 for the mile and her high school season ends. And you had a girl that ran 5:31, and then she goes on to postseason and runs 5:26.
Yeah.
That next year, she's going to run 5:26 to start the year.
Yeah.
Why would we not want that?
Yeah. And it's not, so we know I feel like in youth sports, it's not about the immediate. We can't be struck with these immediate gains. We want this season, which is so egotistical to think, because like, we're not in control of anything, right? All we can do is put these things, but like, I had an athlete a couple seasons ago on track, perfectly tracked. I was proud of my training. She was proud of her running, got sick at prom, right? I was sick for 3 weeks before state and didn't get to run. Obviously she still PR'd at state, but she didn't get to run anywhere close to what 3 weeks of microcycles and meticulously planned training and recovery could have got her to state, right? Doesn't matter like what, so all you can do is your best, but the timeline is not yours, right? This is this kid's life. This is also one thing we overlook, is the resilience of teenagers is huge, right?
Yeah.
But also, we're not in charge of like, we can't be responsible for the the downfall of a human's body, right? That like we push it so hard where it either breaks, and like that discourages future healthy movement. It discourages
Yeah.
future healthy goals. Like what you do as a high school coach literally influences, like you're talking about life.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's got to be handled with fragility.
Yeah. And that is, yeah, that draws right into like a next level after high school, maybe even after college. I also wanted to talk about like longer efforts, like ultra marathon efforts, marathon efforts, and spacing between those.
Yeah.
So I was telling you about an athlete I had that did an Ironman, 5 weeks later, Boston, and then she was wanting to do another Ironman in 3 weeks, or half Ironman.
Yeah.
And I've had other athletes in the past that did like a 50K, 6 weeks later, another 50K, and then they were wanting to do a 100-miler,
Yeah.
you know, in that same cycle. And I have both let athletes do that, and I've learned over the years to try and talk them out of it.
Yeah.
And try and get better spacing, just for that same reason. Like with the high school athlete, give them the richness and the fullness of being able to have a long career, instead of just thinking like the athlete you were talking about that was in that danger area, and decided to push it beyond. Like we've got it. And, you know, I think that's our responsibility as coaches too, to be strong enough to potentially upset an athlete.
Yeah.
And say, hey, I know from experience you're about to get hurt.
Yeah.
Please listen to what I'm telling you to do. And we can't force them to do it, but we can be strong-willed in the sense of, you know, encouragement of, hey, this is getting pretty aggressive. And I think that's difficult for us too, because one of our values with Run Free is we want to believe in our athletes, and we do. Like, I feel like we believe in our athletes maybe more than anybody else does, and more than they do themselves. And we want to be open to like crazy goals and crazy things. But there is like a certain limit where you're like, hey, we've done a ton. We've got to back that off. So how do you judge that limit for yourself as a coach?
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit about, you mentioned the time period between races, and then you mentioned the danger zone that we talked about earlier. So let's define this danger zone, right? Because there's kind of like two danger zones that I see. And I see this in regards to not just training, but I see this in regards to all the injury stuff that I do. And these are kind of like the obvious patterns over the 20 years I've been working with athletes that I see, right? You got at the first danger zone within the cycle, you know, we're constantly building up, we take it down, we can't build up. When we get to that like highest volume, highest pace, kind of like race mimicking portion of the cycle, that's inherently a higher risk portion, right? And within that higher risk portion, that we gotta know it's high risk. And as soon as we acknowledge that's high risk portion, doesn't mean we don't go there. It just means like, okay, let's drop the strength down a little bit. Let's do a little bit extra soft tissue work to prevent some stuff from popping up. That's all it takes, right? So you got to acknowledge it, and then we can add in. The other danger zone I see is you coming off either a bad race or a good race. And if it's a bad race, you say, oh, I didn't use that much energy. I was in a marathon, I was 20 minutes or 15 minutes off my PR. So now I can go right back into it. Okay. Danger zone. If I can go, oh, I did this sick race. Let me just take this peak fitness that I had in this sick race where I PR'd, and I'm just going to continue it forever and ever and ever. Danger zone, right? So it's like, you got to like, I know we've talked before on the podcast about like how you run this PR, that's the best you've ever done. This is not baseline, right? So it's like, we got to then like bring it back down so that we can bring it back up. And I know that a lot of people don't want to do that because they say, oh, I feel really good. But what you're not factoring in is like central nervous system fatigue, slight like minute instabilities, you know, so you can't that danger zone. Like if you feel good, all right, you can still run even if your coach discourages it, but like just make sure at least do like extra soft tissue and extra mobility before you just go into another week of training, right? And I've warned, you know, as we all have, like we've warned athletes about it, but then they just feel so good they want to go into it. And all you can do as a coach, you can't make someone do it. All you can do as a coach is put that extra like risk management in there with soft tissue or mobility, or encouraging ice baths while they do it, or encouraging sauna while they do it, or get some extra sleep. But a lot of the times after a race where they feel good, and this is interesting, is like you feel good in the race. Guess what you have to do after the race? You have to do like an 8-hour car ride, or you got to get on you got to go through the airport and fly. So it's like how you did in the race is like, you're not even the same person by the time you get home, you know?
So here's something that I always tell athletes, and it sounds discouraging at first, but it's right around the same thought process that you have. You're the worst after your hardest efforts.
Yeah.
Like you're down in the dumps. I mean, if I ask you to do, you know, another 10K after you just ran your 10K PR, right then, let's start right now. It's not going to go well.
Yeah.
So you're right. We've got to take it with a thought process of, hey, my body is not just a machine.
Like the mind's good, but like the mind's just riding a high.
Yeah.
The body is not ready. But that only, again, you know, that's the job of the coach, but also like you can only learn that as an athlete through like one, if you trust your coach and your coach is like, no, right? But the other one is you can only learn that by like doing it and getting it.
Screwing it up. Yeah.
But I told one of my athletes the other day, and she was riding high on it, and she kept going. And I said, listen, we can either take 3 or 4 days off, and then we can work in it. You know, 3 or 4 days, it's not that much recovery after a full effort, travel, everything, PR, whatever, right? And then we can build up slowly, or you can deal with something inevitably for a month.
Yeah.
And it's a bummer to see but all you can do is go on previous experience. If you feel good, your previous experience will be like, I can keep ripping it, you know?
Yeah.
But you know, unfortunately, that's just not what our bodies.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is a true expert is someone who's made all the mistakes.
Yeah, dude. I can agree with that. I like that.
Like if you've spent a lot of time and you've made a bunch of mistakes, that is a good thing, because hopefully our mistakes cannot be someone else's.
Yeah.
And you can help them avoid it. So
yeah. So then we talked about like time period between races, right? And obviously this will vary for different quality of athletes, different experience, different age, how well you take care of your body and prioritize recovery and all that stuff, right? But here's my thoughts on it. When we talk about like big efforts 5 weeks apart, or let's say you got an A race and you want to do this B race 5 weeks, right? What 5 weeks allows you to do is you take a week down. You've got a 3 week, you can do a 3 week microcycle and taper. That's perfect, right? If you do 6 weeks, you could do 10 days of working back into it. 3 week plus microcycle and a 1 week taper, or a 10-day taper. It gives you so many options, right? And then that would be like the 2 races, like 5-6 weeks between an A and a B. That B is like really preparing you super well for that A with 5 or 6 weeks. But let's say you go another 5 or 6 weeks, you want to do another race, but it's bigger. And this one's an ultra. So you did a half and prepared you for this marathon, and you shocked yourself in the marathon, you PR'd. And now you're like, oh, perfect. Let's do 6 weeks again. And I'm gonna do a 50 mile. And you're like, now what we're looking at is not impossible. But now what we're looking at is like, okay, just be aware we're increasing risk tremendously, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then after the marathon, unless you're like a super athlete, unless you're like Sarah or Ryan, you're not just training the next week, right? Like how, if you PR in a marathon and you've done a 16-week buildup with B and C races and you just crushed it, right? How long do you think, just from your opinion, how long do you think it takes for the average athlete to be back to just like baseline in regards to central nervous system and sort of lower risk?
I would say at least a month, like
Yeah,
totally.
dude. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I ran ultra marathons, there was times I didn't even run for a month afterwards, you know, because your body is just so, like, you've gone through 10 hours of just hormones dumping and like all this fatigue from the buildup and the peak and like adrenaline and just there's everything that you don't factor in. It's not just like, oh, my body feels good or like psyched out of your mind to just run, right? You have to like hold yourself back. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. That was it.
Yeah. So 4 weeks. So let's say you do a B race, you do the half, right? And then you got 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks, and you do a marathon, right? And then you're like, oh, another 5 to 6 weeks. Let me do this 50-mile with also 8,000 feet of elevation on technical trails. Well, that's great, man. But like, there's not going to be much room for training in between, because if it's 6 weeks out, let's say we minimally takes 2 weeks down after a marathon. Well, it's 2 weeks down. We're going to have to taper for 2 weeks, because you're not just looking at this little block of training to taper for this ultra marathon. You're looking at the previous race plus block and the previous race plus block. Now saying, you know, you got 30 weeks of training in your legs, but to run this 50-mile, right? That's a 2-week taper. So you got to wait 2 weeks, and you got 2 weeks. So now what we're trying to do is get ready for this 50-mile with 2 weeks. What that looks like to me is just easy runs.
You don't do much. Yep.
You don't do much. Easy runs, maybe you power hiking up some hills, right? But the majority of that 6 weeks is like down. But when you get someone psyched out of their mind from like PR after PR, 6 weeks, 5 weeks, boom, 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 increase, they don't want to power hike up hills.
So I think there is an element, at least at some level, of self-sabotage that we all do. We all do it. We're like, we're just going to push until something breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like that self-sabotage mindset of I can do it. I'm going to go. And if I don't do it, then I'm conceding that there's that I'm not capable.
Yeah.
And I think the opposite mindset of that is the longevity mindset, and like a balanced thought process where you're like, I'm really thankful for that effort.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I want to sit with that for a minute and be thankful for that effort.
Mm-hmm.
I actually told a college athlete a few days ago, he ran a big PR for 1,500 meters. And I was like, hey, before you, and I talked to him 3 times about it in separate days. And he said, I know I can go 3 seconds faster. Yeah. That's what he said every time.
Huge PR. Have to go, must go faster.
He ran 3:52.
Yeah.
For 1,500.
Yeah.
And I think it was a 5-second PR.
Yeah, it's big.
Huge.
Yeah.
And he was like, I can go 3 seconds faster, I know. And I was like, hey, before you go there, be thankful for that experience. Recognize the difficulty of it.
Yeah.
Recognize that pacing was perfect. There was no wind. The weather was perfect. You had 5 guys to chase. You were super amped. You were at your home track. Like, I'm not saying don't set that goal to go 3 seconds faster, but sit with that a little bit, because that's going to be a healthy approach and not result in that self-sabotage of next time thinking it's going to be easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, the interesting thing about the self-sabotage, and we see it a number of ways. We see it through performance. We see it through injury, comeback, and everything, right? It's testing the limit. So whether it's performance or coming back from injury, we always test the limits. I know we've spoken on here before about the limit is 1% away from breaking, right? So like when you testing, how do you test the limit of an injury? without knowing that you're 1% away from the injury again, right? From re-injuring it. Like that is the nature of the limit, is being very close to breaking. And that's physically, mentally, whatever, right? The other thing, and I think that's human nature to go for, and you have to go for it, but you have to be aware that you are going for it in we're now at a high risk environment. You've got to determine, is it worth it or is it not worth it? If it's worth it, bro, go break, go get it. If you got other things down the line, you got to hold back. We got to be good to ourselves, right? And then the other thing, and I tell a lot of our athletes that this is like, not getting injured is the #1 performance enhancer, way past steroids or anything illegal. Imagine if you started a sport as a young kid, you never got injured. Just constant development.
I've
right?
actually said that before to people, and they always look at me like I'm crazy. And I've said, listen, if I could do anything in training, someone guaranteed me you will not get injured, I would be the best in the world.
Probably maxing squat every day. I would like sprint every day, right? Yeah, it would be.
There would be no limit. There'd be no limit to your progression. There literally, you would get better your entire life. You would always get better. So I totally agree with you. Like, and here's the other thing, as a 42-year-old, that's my primary goal.
Yeah.
Because I know that's true. And I don't get injured very often. If I do, it's very small because of that slight back off, and then pick my days when I am going to test it and attack. So,
and sorry, and as your coach, right? Like as the person that writes the program, and like we come up with all this stuff together. And I think that's the beauty of like having a coach that like understands not just the athlete, but the goal, right? High performance, low injury. Obviously, that's like such a silly goal, to have. But a lot of people do not do that, right? So it's not that you never get injured. It's that we put the tools in front of you for you to either avoid injury, or if you have something little, we just
minimize it.
Right?
Yeah.
And also, if you're not feeling good for a training session, what do? We
bail.
talk about it, we just move it, or we change it, right? So I think that's, I just think that's huge, is like, you also have to have the tools to like, first of all, you got to know how not to get injured. And then you got to have the tools when something inevitably pops up. You have to know, like, I know that I can use this technique to clear something up. That doesn't mean that you don't take that day off, but we've talked about before, take the one day instead of the 3 weeks later, right? But yeah, man, great point.
Yeah. Well, sweet. That'll conclude it for Q&A with Mitch and Jay. If you guys have any questions, you can shoot either of us an email. You can find our stuff on runfreetraining.com. And man, look forward to next time, answer some more of our athletes' questions, and hopefully provide you guys with some cool stuff. See you,
Awesome,
Mitch.
guys. Thank you so much.
All right.